Dive Podcast, straight talk on politics, national security, and America's future. With Robert Johnson and Linda Miller, we cut through the spin, tackle the tough issues, and give you the real story behind today's headlines. Subscribe now and hit the notification bell to stay informed. Okay, let's get into the events of June 1st, 2025. A really significant day involving those drone strikes on Russian air bases.
Absolutely. It's caused quite a ripple effect, prompting a lot of discussion about reactions and, well, potential responses.
We should start with the operation itself. Webb, it was apparently codenamed.
That's the name being reported, yes. Carried out by Ukrainian intelligence, it seems, early on June 1st.
And the scale was, well, pretty large.
Yes. Reports mention hundreds of drones involved. Hundreds.
Wow. Targeting multiple locations, too, not just one base.
That's a key point. 4 strategic aviation bases were hit, spread right across Russia, from the Arctic down to Siberia, apparently. That kind of reach is notable.
And what aircraft were in the crosshairs?
Primarily, it looks like the older bombers, the Tu-95s and the Tu-22 M3s.
Okay.
There was also mention of an A-50 surveillance plane being hit, but the more modern Tu-160 bombers, they reportedly survived the strikes.
So what was the immediate damage assessment? What did Webb actually achieve?
Well, the reports suggest dozens of aircraft were disabled. That's a significant material impact.
But it goes beyond just the number of planes, doesn't it?
It really does. It seems to have shown that, borders don't automatically mean security anymore, even deep inside Russia. It's described as a painful reminder of vulnerability.
Hitting strategic bombers.
Yeah.
That touches on their nuclear capability, even if indirectly.
Exactly. It's seen as hitting a pillar of the nuclear triad, even if perhaps an auxiliary part of it. It's both symbolic and material.
Right. Auxiliary is probably the key word there. Not the core missile forces, but still sensitive.
Precisely. It highlights a new type of vulnerability for them.
So how did Moscow react right after it happened? What was the initial word from the Kremlin?
Interestingly, the first reaction was described as unusually restrained.
Restrained, really? After dozens of aircraft were hit?
Yeah. Dmitry Peskov, the press secretary, confirmed Russian President Putin was informed timely, but, well, he directed questions about retaliation to the Ministry of Defense.
Okay. And the Ministry of Defense? Did they downplay it?
They actually acknowledged damage had occurred, which isn't always a given.
True.
They announced an investigation, naturally, and said punitive strikes would hit Ukrainian logistics hubs. So acknowledgement, promise of conventional payback, but no immediate sort of drastic threats.
But that seemed to change a bit later, didn't it? There was that call involving Russian President Putin.
Yes, that phone call with U.S. President Trump, that's where the rhetoric seemed to escalate.
Whoa, chef.
Russian President Putin reportedly stated that an attack on the nuclear forces of the Russian Federation shouldn't go unanswered.
Okay, that's definitely stronger language, directly linking the drone strikes to nuclear forces.
It is. But crucially, the reports also say he didn't specify what that answer would be.
So, a strong statement, but vague on the actual response. What effect did that ambiguity have?
Well, it seems it served to, bring back those latent fears in the West about potential nuclear escalation. It put the N-word back into the conversation, even if just rhetorically at that stage.
Let's maybe put these bombers into context. They are part of the nuclear triad, but how big a part?
That's important, yeah. Strategic bombers, like the ones targeted, they make up about a third of Russia's strategic nuclear forces. They're seen as flexible, mobile, but not the primary deterrent.
The main deterrent being?
The mainstays are the intercontinental ballistic missiles, the ICBMs and silos, and the submarines carrying R-29 and Bulava missiles. That's the core.
So losing some older Tu-95s, it hurts, but doesn't fundamentally change their ability to retaliate.
It's seen more as a hit to prestige, a loss of face, rather than something that removes their capacity to inflict, quote, unacceptable damage. Their core retaliatory capability seems intact based on this analysis.
And what about Russia's official nuclear doctrine? Does this drone attack even come close to triggering it?
According to their stated doctrine, no. It's quite clear on this. Nuclear weapons are reserved for situations where the existence of the state is threatened or if an opponent uses WMDs first.
And drones, even hitting these bases, don't have nuclear warheads.
Exactly. So, based purely on the official doctrine, this event doesn't meet the threshold for nuclear use. That's a critical piece of the puzzle.
But doctrines are one thing. What about the internal discussion in Russia? Are there louder voices calling for more?
Yes, that's definitely being reported within Russian media and among figures in places like the State Duma Defense Committee. The calls for a tougher response have grown louder.
Tougher in what way?
They're talking about a demonstrative nuclear signal.
A demonstrative signal. What does that actually mean? Like, what are the examples being floated?
Well, things like an atmospheric nuclear test over an uninhabited area, maybe the Arctic, or even a tactical nuclear strike on a military training ground inside Ukraine.
Okay, those sound dramatic.
Yeah.
What would be the point? Not really a military objective then.
It doesn't seem like it. The idea appears to be psychological, to shock the West, basically. Make them reconsider their support for Ukraine, shift those so-called red lines. It's about intimidation.
Is there pushback against that idea within Russia? Surely someone sees the danger there.
Oh, absolutely. There's a strong counter-argument being discussed that crossing the nuclear threshold, even with a small demonstration, would be like opening Pandora's box.
Meaning, things could spiral very quickly.
Precisely. The potential consequences are seen as huge and unpredictable. Massive diplomatic isolation is one thing, but also potentially a conventional military response from NATO.
Like what?
There's speculation about possible NATO strikes on Russian forces elsewhere, Syria, maybe the Black Sea Fleet. The risks of even a limited nuclear use are seen as incredibly high.
So if that demonstrative signal is too risky, what's the alternative? It seems Russian President Putin is looking at a different approach.
That appears to be the case. The analysis points towards a sort of non-nuclear cocktail of responses.
Cocktail, what's in it?
First ingredient, conventional escalation. We saw that pretty quickly.
The Kharkiv strike on June 3rd.
Exactly. Described as the most powerful strike on the city this year, multiple waves, hypersonic Kinzhals, cruise missiles, drones. The aim seems to be overwhelming Ukrainian air defenses. A clear, forceful, conventional answer.
Okay, so conventional strikes.
Right.
What else is in this cocktail?
Second ingredient, defensive measures. Things like moving the remaining strategic aircraft to smaller airfields, dispersing them, and reinforcing the concrete shelters at the bases.
Practical steps to avoid getting hit again like that.
Right. It's partly defense, but also partly signaling, showing they're adapting and that the success of Webb won't be easily repeated.
And the third ingredient?
Symbolic actions. This seems to refer to conducting nuclear force exercises, like the ones held in southern Russia and Belarus.
We've seen those before, haven't we?
Yes, similar exercises were held back in May 2024. The view is that these are largely for the cameras, for signaling resolve and capability, rather than indicating imminent use or major operational changes.
So, conventional power, defensive adjustments, and nuclear posturing. This combination, does it fit into that boiled frog idea that's been mentioned?
It aligns quite well with the boiled frog metaphor, yes.
Can you just remind us what that means in this context?
Sure. The metaphor is about gradual change. You heat the water slowly. The frog doesn't notice the danger until it's cooked. Applied here, it means slowly, steadily increasing conventional pressure on Ukraine. Not one massive shock, but a gradual turn of the screw until Kyiv theoretically can no longer cope.
And why choose that method?
The analysis suggests Russian President Putin feels he has sufficient public support at home. He doesn't need a big dramatic event to rally people. A slow, grinding approach is politically sustainable for him.
So keep up the conventional strikes, maybe increase them incrementally.
Exactly. Increase the intensity gradually while always maintaining the threat that something worse, maybe those demonstrative actions, is still possible, keeping that ambiguity alive.
And that ambiguity serves a purpose.
It seems so. It's thought to deter the West from sending certain long-range missiles, say, over 500 kilometers, and maybe deter Kyiv from targeting really sensitive sites like missile silos or command centers deep in Russia. It creates hesitation.
What about Washington's take on all this? What's the official line on the June 1st attack?
Officially, the White House has stated it wasn't aware of the Webb operation beforehand. That's the public position.
But are there other signals being sent? Maybe behind the scenes?
There are reports suggesting that through unofficial Pentagon channels, advice is being given to Ukraine, basically urging caution about future strikes, especially against targets Moscow considers sacred objects.
So continued support, but maybe with clearer boundaries or warnings than before.
That seems to be the nuance, yes. Support continues, but perhaps the sensitivity around certain targets is being emphasized more now compared to, say, 2024.
And this fits with U.S. President Trump's overall stated goal of seeking negotiations, right?
It does. A major escalation, particularly anything involving nuclear signals or use, would likely derail any diplomatic efforts U.S. President Trump might want to pursue. It would complicate things immensely.
Looking beyond the immediate back and forth, what does this whole episode signify more broadly?
It really highlights a shift, doesn't it? that a major nuclear power can face significant asymmetric attacks on its own territory without necessarily resorting to the ultimate weapon immediately.
It challenges traditional deterrence ideas.
Absolutely. Deterrence isn't just about multi-million-dollar missiles anymore. Apparently drones costing just thousands of euros can now have a strategic impact, can influence the calculus. That's a big change.
So the lines are blurring.
They are, and it means Moscow, Washington, Brussels, everyone needs to constantly reevaluate where the forbidden lines actually are now. Technology is moving so fast, much faster than military doctrines can keep up.
So summing up the analysis on Russia's potential response, nuclear retaliation isn't seen as imminent right now.
Despite the tough talk and understandable anger in Russia, the assessment seems to be that an immediate nuclear response is unlikely.
Why? What are the main constraints?
Several factors. Russia's own stated nuclear doctrine, which wasn't met by the drone strikes. Also, a rational calculation of costs versus benefits, the potential for extreme isolation and NATO reaction, and just that underlying fear of uncontrollable escalation. These things create a high threshold.
But the risk hasn't vanished.
No, definitely not. The warning is that every new Ukrainian operation hitting sensitive targets or even coming close to them increases the risks. And crucially, that risk increases non-linearly. It jumps up disproportionately the closer you get to those core capabilities.
It sounds like a really dangerous balancing act.
It is. There's a striking phrase used in the analysis. A 50-kilogram drone now has the diplomatic weight of a megaton warhead.
Wow, that really puts it starkly. A small piece of tech carrying that much strategic significance.
It shows how asymmetry is changing the game. Low-cost tech influencing high-stakes geopolitics.
And whether things stay below the threshold depends on, well, restraint.
Paradoxically, yes. The analysis concludes it hinges on restraint from both sides. Ukraine not pushing significantly further than the Webb operation, perhaps, and Russia avoiding a response that could spiral beyond anyone's control.
So it's this ongoing tension. The slow pressure of the boiled frog, combined with the ever-present nonlinear risk of crossing a poorly defined line with rapidly evolving technology.
That captures the current dynamic quite well. Conventional escalation, asymmetric threats, nuclear signaling, they're all intertwined in a very complex and potentially unstable way right now.
Subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. We are here to make things clear. New episodes every day.